In the quiet town of Eastwick, where nothing ever changes, three beautiful women are about to discover powers they never dreamed they had.
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast, where we explore the intersections of horror film and feminism. In this first series, we're bringing on special guests to dive deep into film and TV shows with witchcraft at the heart of them. I'm Anna, co-founder of the Final Girls and your podcast host. This episode, things will get a little bit raunchy, because myself and my special guest, actor Isaura Barbé-Brown, will be discussing the 1987 horror comedy The Witches of Eastwick, which is equal parts empowering, funny, problematic, and terrifying. Based on a novel by John Updike, this big screen adaptation has a star-studded cast, leading with Susan Sarandon, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Cher as the titular witches, who unknowingly conjure up a devilish man into their small, sleepy town of Eastwick. The man in question is Daryl Van Horn, an offensive charmer played by the offensive charmer himself, Jack Nicholson. Daryl seduces all three witches, and through their relationship and as it evolves, they grow to understand their powers. The film is full of sex, comedy, big hairdos, and presents witchcraft as an aspirational, empowering tool for women who have been trying to fit into a stifling community. It deals with repressed sexuality and female creativity, slut-shaming, and the power of covens, even if they're accidental. Isaura and I discussed the film in detail, so if you haven't seen it yet, you might want to give it a watch before listening to this episode.
Who should we be looking for?
He should be really handsome.
Nice eyes.
Now, the man of their dreams is here.
Isaura, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. Ooh, I'm excited too.
I've been dying to talk about this film. I'm really, really happy you picked it.
Yes, it's such a good film. And it's just, I rewatched it for the purposes of this. And it was like, it was work, but not really. Just like I was trying to take notes and I was just watching it. Yeah. And not like taking any notes at all. Just
Same.
Enjoying it. It's such a good film.
And can I ask you, when did you first encounter it? How did you first discover The Witches of Eastwick?
I think it was just on TV when I don't know how old I was. Young, like maybe 11 or something.
Oh, that's young for this film.
I don't think I was meant to be watching it, but I did. And I just loved it. I think I was getting into like horrors or films I shouldn't be watching at that point. Like that was a point where I started like definitely sneakily watching films I was banned from watching. And I just loved it. Yeah, I think, was it probably The Witches was my first witch film. Mm-hmm. But this is probably the second one.
And what do you remember the most about it?
The fashion. Honestly, big hair and like really cool outfits was the first thing I took away from it.
The hair. Half of the character development for the witches is basically their hair.
Look at how great their hair is, guys. I was obsessed with it. I was like, I just want I think particularly Cher's hair I wanted. Well, the one bit when Cher has pigtails is just so great. And the little fashion things that were just, I don't know, so perfectly done. I was like, I want everyone's outfit in this film. It's so good. All looked amazing. I think that's what I took away from it. I was like, wow, they're all so beautiful and incredible.
And what did you think about it kind of rewatching it for this?
I still think it's so great. And I still have that thing about the fashion. I was like, I actually want to like buy some of these outfits. I want to like recreate them. And obviously I got more from it watching it. All the stuff about being a woman, and now I'm a woman in my 30s, and the way you're viewed in society and the ways you reduce yourself to be acceptable to society. And I'm not a mother, but I imagine especially if you're a mother, the expectations there. And I don't live in a small town. Obviously I live in London, but I can only imagine that's even like that's more heightened when you live in a small town. So that was quite interesting, all the ways that women are talked about and the way they view themselves, and even the way they change when they feel more free, like their hair, their clothes, their behavior, the way they carry themselves. Yeah,
And so kind of let's talk a little bit about each individual witch.
Yes.
So we've got Alexandra, who's played by Cher, who's sort of the local sculptress. And we've got Jane, who is played by Susan Sarandon, who's the music teacher and cello player. And Suki, who's a journalist and a mother of 4 kids. 6.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I know.
Played by Michelle Pfeiffer, who did not look like she'd had 6
Definitely
kids.
doesn't look like she's popped out 6 kids, no.
Yeah. So how would you describe each one of them?
So I feel like Jane, who's Susan Sarandon, is the most repressed one. She definitely is the one that holds herself. She's more pinned in one, which is demonstrated by her like very tight plait for the beginning part of the film.
Again, hair. Character development.
Plait and glasses. Just this her, like, she's very, and she gets told her, like, even her playing of the cello is prissy. So she's the most pinned in one, which is actually interesting because she's the most susceptible to Daryl. So she's the most repressed and gets the most out of the freedom that comes from him. She's the easiest to like be kind of switched by him or be kind of taken in by him. And she's the one who seems to relish in it the most and get the most out of it and change the most, I think, by the end. Alexandra, played by Cher, I think she's kind of the happy medium, but she's tough, but also is kind of a mix of the two of them. She can be wild, but she can also be pinned in. She's got 1 child, so she's a mother, so she has to be a certain level of responsible, but is also kind of a free spirit.
Well, I think we're a little young to just lock it up and throw away the key, you know? I mean, it's not natural. What are we doing with ourselves? Yeah, Ozzy's dead. I loved him. He's dead. Does that mean that I have to spend the rest of my life having drinks with you 2 every Thursday night?
Who has a kid who kind of looks after herself, which kind of allows her to be this free spirit. And I can see her kind of with a foot in both camps. And Suki, I think she's the most in tune with her power. She's the one who first notices. When she says about the rain, when the rain during that guy's speech, she's the one who first notices there might be something weird there, that there might be power there. She seems to be the one who understands it the most. She also, there's a bit that's never really not discussed, but when she's in her garden, she's got that basket full of vegetables. She's got this enormous like marrow, I think it is, and she seems to be like green things. She's like fertile in every part of her life. You see what I mean? She can make things grow. She has all these kids. She can make things grow, and it seems to be that for me seems like she's most in touch with like her like earth mother kind of side of things.
And then it rained. He's a liar and a lech, and he deserved it.
No, I mean, I'm not talking about Walter. I mean, don't you think that's kind of strange that we were all...
So we were all thinking the same thing at the same time, Suki. I mean, so what? I mean, it's not like it's going to get us on David Letterman.
I know, I
Let us
just...
have a drink.
Good idea, Janie. Party, baby.
And she's the first one to really question their connection to Daryl and what it's doing and what it is. And it's also the calmest when the newspaper writes about them and what's going on at the house. She kind of addresses it in a more of a calm way and seems to understand the guy she works with, his position more, and that is probably to do with his wife, and she's the most sympathetic to Felicia. And so yeah, I think she's like maybe the most powerful in a way. She just knows herself the best, I guess, is what it is.
I find it really interesting as well that they come into their powers when they're all together, where they kind of unwillingly conjure up Daryl when they're having drinks together, and you know the lightning strikes just as they clink their glasses.
Yeah.
Cheers. Cheers.
And there's something that I noticed for the first time having rewatched it for this, that Daryl refers to kind of women being single by death, desertion, or divorce, and that's exactly why they're single. So they're celebrating Jane's divorce from her husband, and Suki was left by her husband, and Alex's husband died. So they kind of represent singlehood because of those 3 reasons at the same time. And then they sort of talk about their ideal man, and kind of all of them are quite different, but they conjure up this figure that comes into town, and it's like they they seem to very slowly, and through Suki, like you say, sort of realize that when they're together is when they're most powerful and they can make things happen in a way.
Yeah.
But it feels like they're unknowing witches.
Yeah. Yeah, they definitely don't. There's an idea of it. I love the idea they accidentally make this cover.
An accidental cover, yeah.
I kind of love that. And it kind of, for me, it speaks to the power that women don't know they have. And because they're all full of creativity, like one's a journalist, one's a sculptress, one's a musician, they're all creative, and so they're freer in the sense than their other female counterparts in the town. But to my mind, it could have been any three women.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it speaks to that they've found a special friendship, and because they're open with each other and honest with each other, and they have these regular Thursday meetings, so they try and do new things, and they're relaxed around each other. They found this bond, but I think any three women could form that bond and have that power. Because I think it's not that the other women in the town couldn't be like that. It's more that they're it's more repression, or more of a fear of those kinds of things, or fear of that kind of stuff. And because these women happen to explore it, because Daryl comes specifically for them, and it kind of opens the doorway to that power, is the reason it's those three. But it is because Suki does notice it early on, and I wonder if she's noticed other things before that that made her go, it's weird that we were all hoping it would rain so that guy would stop speaking, and then it did. Like, I wonder if there's any other little things that she's noticed on the way to there, like, because we're obviously joining at the most interesting point. But so yeah, I think any three women can make an accidental cover.
And it's interesting that, like, there's you mentioned a few of them before as well, of like some of their shared traits, like they're all creative in different ways. It's interesting that they're all want to be mothers, or are mothers in a way. So Suki, like you mentioned, is extremely kind of fertile and makes things grow, and has a lot of children. And Alex has a child, but kind of, you know, their relationship is kind of a little bit distant because the child is very self-sufficient. And they say explicitly that Jane cannot have children, but it's like, it seems like something of a frustration for her that she's not able to have kids. But it's like they seem to all be restraining themselves in some way, like, or sort of taking their positive qualities as negative ones, or sort of trying to, like you mentioned before, sort of reduce themselves in order to fit in a bit better into what's expected of them. Yeah. So even kind of Alex being a widow, she kind of, I think at the beginning, is battling with this idea of what is expected of her as a widow. And I think Cher mentions this thing of like, oh, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Have drinks with you on Thursdays, and that's it. Yeah. Yeah. So they all seem to be also kind of explicitly talking about like feeling unfulfilled, not necessarily just creatively, but also like sexually. So when they're very explicitly kind of conjuring a man, they're like straight up are talking about how they want him to be and how they want him to like have sex with them. Yeah. Which I found, like, obviously that went completely above my head when I watched it as a kid, but rewatching it now, I was like, oh, they're like very not repressed with each other, but clearly presenting like an image of themselves that's a lot more couth, is the word? They don't want to be viewed as unbecoming, I guess, or even though I don't think they feel like, the reason these three are friends is because they probably don't feel like the rest of the women in this town, but they can only be like that with each other, and to the outside world they have to like have this public face, because it does quickly turn to sex. You're right, when they're talking about a man, and then like penis size comes up quite a lot in the film, which I didn't notice as a kid. I was like, oh, comes up like 3 times. Oh yeah, I know. I actually made a note of it, and I was like, oh, all they're doing is talking about dick size in this movie.
And I was like, Okay. Well, so even talking about Fidel, when she goes to finish has lunch with it, he's got huge, and I'm like, this is hilarious. This keeps coming up. And even Felicia talks about it. Mm-hmm. She talks about sex with her, and so there's this connection to what they're holding back, and sexual frustration, or sexual freedom, which comes with the freedom in general, which it makes sense, I guess, especially when you're a woman who's been, if you're divorced or your husband's gone, especially if you're a mother or your husband's died, there are people for some reason who have an opinion about what you should be doing about dating, or how you should move on, or whether you should move on at all, or
whether you're allowed to.
Yeah. What you're allowed to do after that. And so maybe that's why, if they had just always been single and they were just allowed to be dating or liking someone or whatever, maybe it wouldn't be as potent. But because there's this added pressure, especially if you're a mother of 6, I mean, people are going to be, she dates anyone, there's going to be questions there's going to be all kinds of things. So yeah.
And let's talk about Daryl. I mean, there's a few things there's a lot of stuff that's interesting about him, but kind of, how do we first meet him in the film?
He's in the back of Jane's concert, snoring, a kind of animalistic snore, which is quite odd, because he's what? He's there on purpose, but he's just flat out asleep for some reason, falls off his chair, and then does this big applause and whatever.
Yeah, he's very garish and kind of trashy.
But immediately Jane is please, even though he's just been sleeping through it, she's completely already excited by him.
Yeah.
And no one can remember his name.
Yeah, there's this big thing about his name, even before we see him.
Yeah, that everyone's oh, it's just on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah.
And then it's just after the concert, when they're all talking afterwards, and then everyone remembers at the same time.
Yeah.
And, her necklace breaks.
And is it Suki who remembers it for the first time?
Suki's oh, it's a D something, R something, L something, and it's kind of simultaneous, it's all at kind of several people at the same time. And then Suki's necklace breaks, and then Felicia breaks a leg. Which is really interesting, because there is lots of stuff about naming a demon, right? If you know its name.
Yes.
And so it's really interesting that's the thing, that it needs to be collectively known at that point. I'm not even sure if I really know why before that they couldn't remember. Maybe he was just waiting to reveal himself at that point when they were all together. Maybe it was more powerful. But Daryl's I like that they describe when they're conjuring him, they say not too handsome
but not too handsome. Which is kind of the perfect description of Jack Nicholson as well, who plays him.
Yeah.
What did you think about his performance?
I think he's great, because Jack Nicholson is equal parts fascinating and terrifying. He just has that kind of ability to switch between being quite charming but also being quite terrifying. It's just he's because he played a few parts like that, and you're just he kind of conjures up that perfect, and he is magnetic. That's why he's a movie star. He's endlessly watchable, and there's the lady in the store who sells Alexandra's sculptures, describes in a really interesting way, because she's oh, he's not handsome. She's he's not, but she's but his eyes, he couldn't stop looking at his eyes, and she had all these thoughts about she's oh, I had all these thoughts about him, and you're yeah, there is something there. You could imagine if he had all his attention on you, it'd be really intense, and you'd be a bit
I'm so glad you mentioned that bit with the lady in the store, because she says this amazing line of he's made me think things I haven't thought since World War II.
Yeah, which is to have that ability to have, and there are men like that, where at a first glance you'd be oh no, we're not attracted to that person, but if they put all their attention on you, you'll suddenly find yourself a bit disarmed, and you don't really understand it. He's that's Stellan Skarsgård.
Oh my god.
He's exactly
I
like
need to
that.
stop for a second there. That is so accurate. Jesus Christ.
He's exactly like that. He came into, when I worked in a cinema, he came in for a Q&A and he came to, and I didn't think I fancied Stellan Skarsgård, and then he came to the bar and I had to serve him drinks and I did not know what I was doing. I dropped so many things just because he was so focused, and I was like, I don't really know what to do under like your gaze. I kept dropping things and he was like, oh, you're quite clumsy, aren't you? And I was like, oh my God, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's happening. It was, and I was like, I completely understand. If he came to talk to me and I was like standing at a bar, I mean, 5 minutes. He was so charming. And there's just something about his focus, and I don't know.
And like Jack Nicholson has that thing as
Right.
well. Like it's part of his charisma. Like, you
Yeah.
know, when someone just focuses on you and it's like you're in a big, huge spotlight, essentially. So like, even, you know, within the film, but also his persona outside of any kind of performance that he's done, it's like that kind of charm and his notoriety as sort of a ladies' man, as like a charming rogue. And, you know, that also has negative connotations. Like, you know, he cheated on his long-term girlfriend, Angelica Houston, like so many times. But at the same time, you know, not to dismiss that at all, but like that potency of that focus and that attention that certain people have, he's sort of, I can't imagine anyone else aside from maybe Stellan Skarsgård
Apart from Stellan.
yeah,
Yeah.
playing that character who like doesn't necessarily on paper have anything particularly special. Like Jack Nicholson in this film is already sort of middle-aged, quite balding, you know, quite pudgy. He's dressed in these like ridiculous clothes all film long.
Yeah.
He sort of looks like a goober, you know. He's
Yeah.
got the big, the like horrible pink shorts and the tall socks that he wears all the time. And then at the same time, he's the most attractive man on screen.
Yeah.
Because the minute he like opens his eyes and zeroes in on someone, there's this great scene, remember, in when all three of the witches come visit him in his house and Jane is already there and Alex
I do the
has
same
already
thing. I was like, Cher.
Alex has already sort of, you know, been seduced by him. Suki's the last one left and he just sort of completely ignores Jane and Alex and just zeroes in on Suki. And they all know what's going on and she knows what's going on. But at the same time, it's like, well, what can you do?
Yeah. None of them even question him on it. Because Alex and Jane are there, like, obviously annoyed or, like, thrown by it, but can't seem to bring themselves to, like, say anything to him about it. None of them are just like, wait a second. They just let it happen because you understand that he's just going to do what he's going to do. He's that. And it's, when you said the thing about spotlight, it's true. Like, it's because there are certain people, I guess, when they focus on you. I think there's a few celebrities like that, like male celebrities especially, where in interviews, people who interview them have said when they look at you, it feels it's quite intense. It's like they see through you. It's very hard to hide from them. And he's one of those people in the film, especially, because he immediately like speaks right to the center of these women, like their fears, or says the things they want to hear, or notice things about their life or them that they don't openly talk about or don't necessarily think they're presenting. And he just sees right through it. And he can act like this goober. He can be this ridiculous man and still see all of this. And it's that would be disarming, I imagine. Like, this guy who's just endlessly confident just is exactly who he is, but then also just can just turn on this like spotlight and be like, these things about your life, and this is why you're frustrated, and these are the things you're missing, and I can fix that.
But it's weird because he seduces all three witches individually in very different ways. Like, he's sort of playing different versions of himself for each one of them.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that with Jane in particular, he brings up witches himself. He like brings up, well, he has this whole, you know, speech about kind of that witches were kind of a method of oppression by the patriarchal system, especially kind of by male medical professionals who wanted to get rid of midwives who were taking away their jobs, is kind of the story that he tells that's specific to that particular town.
They're scared.
Their dicks get limp when confronted by a woman of obvious power, and what do they do about it? Call them witches, burn them, torture them, until every woman is afraid. Afraid of herself, afraid of men, and all for what? Fear of losing their heart-on.
But it's like he's sort of so playing into the feminist narrative for each one of them in different ways. What did you kind of think about that kind of, especially rewatching it as an adult?
Yeah, I think, so it's really interesting because I was just like, well, he's not wrong. And all the things he says to them about the way women are treated or viewed, I don't disagree with any of the things. But I'm like, just because it's true doesn't mean it's not a trick. Mm-hmm. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So he reminds me of like a lot of like hackney fuckboys now, who know they're meant to be a feminist, so they use the terminology and the right words and they say the right things like on a first or second date, but actually everything else about their behavior is like very misogynistic, and they don't actually want to get into deep discussions about it. They want to say the words and be pat on the back or use it as a way to
like lower your defenses.
Yeah, because you go, oh, you know about this stuff. It's like, no, they just know the right language.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, so just knowing what you're saying and knowing that that's a thing that exists doesn't mean you actually care about it or live your life in any way that reflects that you know that. So I'm like, he's just like a lot of guys now who will use this thing to disarm you and to like speak to your particular struggle and then that will go out the window the minute they have what they want. And even in the way he throws tantrums and stuff, I was just like, he's exactly like that. Like they didn't even know what they were doing, but they're just literally that's like men now. But yeah, it's quite interesting because he nails a lot of things. He's talking to Alex about the fact that she's smart in ways she doesn't even know she's smart, and how she reduces herself, and like how men want her to be reduced, and how women are actually usually thinking about other things and men are obsessed with like the smaller things. And where he's like saying how men are just worried that they're not going to be able to like get it up for certain things. They reduce women because they're like, oh yeah, when they meet powerful women, and it scares them and they don't know what to do with it, so they rather make them smaller because they're worried that they won't be able to get it up for. And I was like, this is all like actually like really detailed, like really specific analysis that is clever. It's just coming from this person who's using it for his gain rather than actually trying to do anything with it.
Yeah. And it's interesting that even kind of as you mentioned before, Suki's the only one to sort of see through him. Yeah. And when her turn comes, she's very nonchalant about it. And she's like, oh, are you going to seduce me now? Yeah.
And his seduction of her is much simpler.
Yeah.
He knows she's the most in tune and the most powerful. Like Suki's, and I don't think I found, when I watched it when I was younger, her character is interesting. And this watch around, I found it a lot more interesting. So I was like, she just knows herself. She knows what this is. She's much more understanding of what's going on in this situation.
Absolutely.
And that's why I think as well, when they leave him, when they decide it's a bad idea to keep going to the house and stuff, he punishes her the most.
Yeah.
Because she's the one who understands the most. And like, I think it's very interesting that her punishment is very physical, very painful, and like almost killing her to a point. I was like, it's because she knows the most. And I think, yeah, it speaks to how powerful she already knows. It's down. She knows from the big off. It's and so I find her character very interesting. That she's the most, yeah.
And it's fascinating. So again, did not realize it when I first watched it, but they essentially become a polyamorous couple. Well, quadruple. They begin a polyamorous relationship between all four of them, which is never actually mentioned or named in the film. It's just really casual, like, and a couple of times the witches are talking amongst themselves and they're like, oh, maybe we should stop for a bit because it's getting a bit tense, or the town folk are going to come after us or whatnot. Yeah. But they sort of completely throw themselves into it and find themselves being quite happy and content and liberated by this four-way relationship. And I thought that was like kind of surprisingly chill about it, kind of in the whole film. Like they don't name it, they don't go into specifics, they don't try to position it as one thing or another. It's just sort of there.
Yeah.
And it works for them for a while.
Yeah. And that is because when I watched it as a kid, I remember being in my kid brain, it was like quite a sexy film. And when you rewatch it, I'm like, there's actually not very much sex. You see the beginning of all, like, as in, like, you see him kiss each one of them at the beginning of the seduction.
Yeah.
But that's it. And you kind of know there's something going on, but it's never talked about, really. None of them talk about, apart from Cher the first time, when she talks about the first time she slept with him and how she feels about it. But that's a very short conversation.
I don't believe it. Neither do I. But I swear to God, I could barely walk for 2 days. He has this most amazing penis. It bends the wrong way. What do you mean it bends the wrong way? Wait a minute, what? I mean, it kind of bends like that.
You're terrible.
No, I'm not. I'm fabulous.
And then they never talk about it after that. Even the fact they're all pregnant. Like, when I was watching, I was just like, it's interesting because they don't actually discuss the fact that they've all, and it's been going on for quite a while, I'm guessing, at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And even, is it Cher's daughter, Alexandra's daughter, I've forgotten what Cher is, the townspeople are saying, oh, your mother's like the horrible D word for a lesbian, but like, and like, so they know, they're aware that there's a crossover there because they don't question that that's what happened. They're just like, oh, that's horrible that they're saying that to your kid, but don't question what they're doing up there. And
there's that horrible scene as well with Jane when she just goes to the supermarket to buy some stuff, you know, when her transformation is the most physically noticeable one because she goes from being a very prim, you know, bottled in, tight hair in a bun, big glasses and kind of a lot of beige clothes to being this like wild red hair out there, kind of wearing really kind of lovely, you know, midriff showing off kind of clothes. Yeah. Not like particularly revealing, just kind of like much more eclectic and colorful. And her movements begin to be like a lot more unrestricted. She sort of wanders around the supermarket and she's eating some pickles and she grabs this newspaper and there's this article about all of them. And you see this row of women all dressed in beige.
Yeah.
Just staring her down. And one of them calls her a slut. And it's just this I found that to be one of the most violent scenes in the film where it's just like staring down and shaming this woman for something they have no idea about and no business in. And it affects them in no way.
Right. It's that thing of, because what are those women really afraid of? Is it their own sexuality, their own, like, because there's that whisper at the end, right? She's like, not wearing a bra. And it's this whole thing. And the not wearing a bra thing, because I remember, I don't usually wear a bra because I have very big boobs and they're very uncomfortable. And I remember when I stopped wearing one, when I was maybe like 21 or 22, and having like aunties and stuff be like, oh, it's so indecent that you're not wearing it. And I was like, and this idea, and the older I got, I was like, why is it that like literally bras serve a function. If you like have a certain like size of boob or whatever, you're wearing a certain outfit, then I completely understand. But if you're not, or if you just don't like wearing one, like, they're literally meant to be a functional thing, not like a decency thing.
Well, it's interesting, the word indecent. It's like, you're indecent if you don't wear a bra. It's not the people looking at you that are indecent for looking at you and at your breasts. Yeah.
And there's also, if people don't look at breasts if you're wearing a bra anyway. I was like, does that stop people? I don't think it does. I don't think it does what you think it does. I think there are certain people who look at boobs, whatever is going on that I'm wearing. But yeah, I find that the most like difficult scene as well, because even the woman who calls her a slut won't look at her afterwards. Like, you can't even say it really to her face. And I find it interesting because Jane's obviously enjoying this freedom so much, but that really, she just leaves the supermarket without buying any of her stuff. That really throws her. So she's still so scared of being judged, even though she's enjoying this, and because she's been in her little bubble up at the house, it really throws her that people think that about her and they didn't used to. She was like this, she's had cancellations for her students. She still obviously cares about her job and she hasn't reconciled those two sides of her yet. And I find it really fascinating, actually. That reminds me of, so when she's conducting the music class and she's more free Jane, and she's dancing around and making the kids like dance around. And that guy who sexually harassed her at the beginning, he sees her and he's scared. He like runs down the hallway. And I was like, that's really interesting that he's like afraid of her suddenly, which they never really come back to, they never address, but there's something he sees that is just like terrifying for him. And it's because I guess he's one of those men that Dow was talking about, that a woman's power is actually quite terrifying for him. His enjoyment of women, or it comes from them being weaker than him.
Yeah, it's a power game as opposed to actual attraction.
Yeah, but the fact he's actually afraid of it is fascinating, because she's not doing anything. She's literally just like having fun with the kids, but he's just like, oh, like he's seen a ghost. So I do. I think it's very it is very interesting, and I think it's the same with the women. And the women are afraid also, but I think their fear manifests itself in attack rather than actually like pulling back from.
And what do you think about the other kind of main female character in the film, aside from the witches, is Felicia?
I really like Felicia. First of all, that performance is, I can't remember the actress's name, but
Veronica Cartwright.
Incredible. Like, her performance is so, and watching it back, I was like, my God, like really has the hardest, I think, job in this film, because it's such an erratic, she's like, there's a bit where she's like vomiting up cherry pits, and I was like, her voice is so even at the beginning of, she's still just talking, but she's, these cherry pips and like stalks coming out of her mouth. That made me not be able to eat cherries for a really long time as well. It's so disgusting. So like I still like kind of look away when it's happening. I'm like, oh my God, that's really upsetting. That's I don't know how they filmed this, but what? And I actually really love Felicia, because I think Felicia's a witch too.
Oh.
Because she knows immediately that something bad is coming to town. Immediately. She's like, something bad's happening. Something bad's coming. She's in... When someone says someone bought the Lennox estate, she drops whatever she's holding, like a pot of something in the flowers she's holding. Mm-hmm. And she's just like... And then she's talking to her husband, and she's like, something evil's coming. Something bad's coming. And she phrases it... She puts it in context of like... She's like, oh, the birds. But it's like, that's not what she's really worried about. And the whole thing where she's seeing things, and when she's like, there's something evil, there's something wrong. And the reason she's so attacked, obviously, I think it's Daryl doing the stuff, her leg break, her being like slowly, like seemingly to lose her mind. I'm like, that's Daryl protecting
himself.
Because what would happen if she did actually get close to these other three women? An even more powerful coven, probably. But she has a very specific idea of what's evil and what's not, so it would be dangerous for him. He can't win Felicia over, so he kills her. And
that scene as well, when she is murdered, is kind of one of the real horrific scenes of the film. So there's not that many scenes of sort of violence or horror, but that is the first one that sort of really, for me, twists the tone of the film from kind of a sort of a sex comedy almost, with tinges of the supernatural and the witchy, to, oh no, he's actually an evil devil character, and he's making them do this stuff not for them but in order to protect themselves. And like that cherry pit scene is horrific,
like so horrific,
and like it's really visceral, and like it would just not stop. And then to the point where her husband, played by baby Richard Jenkins, who at like 40 something looks like it's a baby, he eventually just like goes mad and murders her in cold blood. And it's like, we don't see the actual murder, we just hear it, and then we see all this like blood spatter on the walls. But it's also, that plays into, he's scared of his wife, and it plays into that whole scared of, obviously it's like, it presents itself in quite a terrifying way, but he's scared of her power and scared of the stuff she says. He doesn't want to listen directly to anything she's saying. He doesn't want to like look at it directly, because at that point she's saying, he's inside me. She's vomiting cherry pits. Like, what? How many cherries would you have to have eaten for that? Do you mean something's going on? And it's, and also the idea, like, presses against the idea of this
women being mad, like when women are talking about things you don't understand, it's like madness. He dismisses everything as just, she's not well, something's wrong with her head, rather than listening to her. And that's obviously in history a thing that's been done to women, and it's so easy to write things they feel or saying off, because it's like, oh, even when he's feeding her, he's literally trying to shut her up by feeding her more when she's in hospital, because he just doesn't want to hear it. At no point does he ever sit and look at her and listen to what she's saying. And I actually think Felicia's like presented as the villain almost in the film, but I don't think she is. I think she's worried. I think she knows how to deal with it, but I think she's worried about something evil, because she's absolutely right. There is something evil. And even at the end, when she's saying he's inside me, one of the last things she says is, those poor women, I have to warn them. So she's not actually necessarily against them. And rewatching it as an adult, because as a kid, I thought she was the villain. I remember there's like this bad character. And rewatching it now, I was like, she doesn't actually ever say anything directly bad about them. She never actually calls them any names. She's like, there's stuff going on up there that is bad, but she doesn't actually direct it at these women. And it's kind of attributed to her all the way the women behave. But I personally think the women would have behaved that way anyway. But yeah, one of her last thoughts is those poor women, because she realizes they're being manipulated too, and he's inside of them too. And she says they're gonna have his kids. They're gonna have his sons. She has vision, so I think she's magical also. She just doesn't know how to do, and it's being turned against her, that power.
Oh my God, you're so right.
Yeah, she's a witch too, and she could have been in another world. She could have been part of that coven. But yeah, he made sure she wasn't. He made sure she was kept far away from, even by hospitalizing her that early. The minute his name is mentioned, Felicia is hospitalized and separated from a lot of the rest of society, right? Especially those women. And then when Suki's the only one that comes to visit her, and she like freaks out when Suki walks in. So he separated her immediately from these women. And the only reason I could see is that it's easier for him to manipulate them without that voice there. But yeah, I love her.
What did you think about the ending? Because after Felicia's death, it sort of all starts to escalate into a lot more outright supernatural stuff. So they sort of do make a voodoo doll out of Daryl and sort of try to hurt him, banish him in that way. And then he becomes some sort of
big
CGI creature. Early CGI creature.
Yeah.
He looks like a giant dick monster, basically.
He does. Like, it's very, because like, clearly like plasticine as well, so you're just like, oh. But I quite like, because it's so short, that bit, that I quite like that they kind of, you don't even really fully see it. And even rewatching, I had to like pause it, because I was like, I'm not sure I actually know what this, it's so quick, the flashes of it. And I think they did need to, if he just kind of disappeared, it would have felt a bit anticlimactic. So I like that there's an idea that he's just actually this much bigger, much more malva. Even when he comes in the house and his foot's like out of his shoe, it's like this weird, like big, like foot. And I'm like, he's wearing like a human suit. He's like a demon. He's not in his true form or whatever. And I think it's quite nice that we kind of get a glimpse of, because it needs to feel like he was actually this big scary thing, not just a man. We have to remember that he's something else. He's just playing the role of a man right now.
Yeah, and it's difficult to remember that if he's, his costume is a very charming Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, and then he just kind of dies or disappears. It would be a bit like, oh, was he just a man? So I think it needed to get to that, and it's only so quick. I do love the bit where they're like running through the house, like they try and pretend that they're all reading when he comes back, and they're like, oh no, this is not gonna work. And how literal the doll is, like he's just literally flying around, and it's the first time they really are actively using their powers. That's the first time they really go, we're going to do specific things to use our powers to protect ourselves, rather than accidentally using them. So I quite like that's how powerful they are. The first time they choose to use it, again, they get rid of him, because that's how powerful the three of them are together. And I think realizing that they're stronger than him in that moment is really, I really like it. I think it's great. I get why it looks a bit like weird now. I really like, and it really scared me when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah, that end bit when he comes in the house, he's terrifying. All the way up to the bit when they actually kill him, I was like, oh my God, really freaked me out.
And it's really interesting that at the end, when they're kind of, he's banished and he's gone and they're sort of living life in his old house, still all three of them living together with their kids and also the sons that they had by Daryl.
Yeah.
And he pops up on the television. So his image still pops up kind of in this weird
several screen
installation of different TVs, which looks great, makes very little sense to have in a house, really, but looks fab.
Yeah.
And he pops up kind of trying to attract the children to him, and there's sort of like that little bit of menace as well left in him. And do you remember when Suki mentions that thing of like, oh, we should not think about him when we're all together?
Yeah.
It's like, again, she's the one that knows, sort of understands a bit more
about what they can do.
Yeah, and how their power can align and manifest itself outside even of their control.
And it's very interesting because they are sitting together and like they just know she's thinking about him. So they've obviously connected to that a bit more where they're like, stop it. Because they know they can sense each other more. And it's interesting that Jane's the one who's thinking about him. Jane's still the most susceptible, still the one who misses him. Even when they're doing the voodoo doll stuff, she's like, oh, will it hurt him? It's like, obviously it will. But she's like worried about it. She's in love. She's the most in love with him. Like genuinely is like, oh, he's like my boyfriend now. And it's like, no, honey.
No, he's not.
And I think it's interesting as well. So it's kind of implied the first scene after they all kind of become okay with them being in this quadruple couple, that the kids are also living in the house, Suki's kids and Alexandra's kid, because they're all with them. They're just kind of not really seen. And the kids are kind of, what's the word? Communal in a way, the way they treat the children, that they're kind of all their kids anyway. They kind of just, very comfortable or very normal that they're all just together.
Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting at the end when they've had the three boys and all of them are living in the house, that every single room is like a kid's room after that. The kids' toys, every room is set up for kids. There's no like room that's theirs and no specific kids' playroom. There are literally toys in every room we see. So that whole thing becomes about the children, which is really interesting. And I wonder why. I feel like children in general in that film have more of a significance than maybe I've caught on to. But
it's fascinating that you mention it, because usually witches are presented as children hating characters. So kind of one of their big transgressions against sort of what's expected of women is the fact that they don't like or don't want children, or they very actively seek to hurt children. Usually, I'm thinking of films like Hocus Pocus or even The Witches, where they hurt children in order to get something from them, usually kind of involved with kind of maintaining their youth and their beauty and so on and so forth. But here, they're mothers. Eventually, all of them are mothers, and they have the shared responsibility, but also they are there to protect their kids.
Yeah.
And they create this sort of safe haven for them. Like you mentioned, that's all designed for the children.
Yeah.
As opposed to for themselves necessarily. So that kind of feels weirdly both very conservative, but at the same time transgressive, kind of based on what we're used to seeing from witches.
Yeah, but I also think it's quite modern in a way that these three single women are just all raising their children together, and all of them kind of play the role of mother to any child that happens to be around. And that's how they were kind of living before that as well. So I quite like the idea of, well, you just kind of look after your friends' kids or your kids, and that's just kind of how it works, and it's all fine, and you don't actually need, you can, three of you can be parents to these three, like to all these children. I think it's like 7 children at the beginning and then 10 at the end, I guess. Yeah. And it just, there's this idea that they're just kind of surrounded by kids this whole time, like almost like a gut, like, do you mean these fertile like women witches surrounded by like children and babies and like kids' toys, and that's what they do and that's how they live. So I do, and it kind of puts me in mind of, so you mentioned Hocus Pocus and Witches, where it's about getting children to steal their youth. But this film reminds me kind of more of Practical Magic, in that sense of like children being this precious, like, because you're going to bring them up and they're also going to maybe be powerful, and they're like precious for that reason. And specifically in Practical Magic, because it is two aunts raising two girls, and then Sandra Bullock on her own raising two girls, and this idea that it's this feminine transaction, and all the kids they have before are girls, right? So all of Suki's 6 are girls, and Alexandra has a girl, and it's like, I wonder what the difference is with these 3 boys now. They have these 3 boys that maybe they have to be a bit more protective of, that's a bit different. And yeah, it's really interesting when it's about witches having children, because it is always passed down from girl to girl. And are these boys going to be like Daryl? Or they, is that what they're protecting them from? Will they be protected because they're surrounded by all these women? Will the daughters be witches as well? Will they understand? Will they ever teach them about it? Or, yeah, I find it fascinating. I would love to see like a second version of it.
I mean, there is a second book.
There is a second book.
Maybe there's something in there.
Maybe.
Thank you so much for your time and for your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Where can people find more of your work, online or elsewhere?
Well, I'm an actor. I actually play a witch in Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. So
kept that quiet.
It's all very connected. I'm a French witch. Was it a pure blood French witch? Who's a noted beauty in Paris, apparently. So, according to the script, like, I didn't say it. That's what the script said. So I'm just saying. Yes, I'm an actor. So if you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, I'll post about work I'm doing or stuff like that.
And that's it for another episode of the Final Ghost podcast. Please do rate, subscribe, and share your favorite share gifts with us on social media. You can find out more about what we do on thefinalghost.co.uk and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook on @thefinalghostuk. You can also follow Isaura on Twitter @Isaura_BB and Instagram @Isaurasaurus.
I hope his dick is bigger than his IQ.